There is an icon at the bottom that says reactions, where you will be able to raise your hand. And at that time, if you would like to ask a question, I will call on you to at that moment. So we'll go ahead and get started right now in the interest of time. I know some folks are eating dinner, some folks have ate dinner, and some people are waiting to eat dinner till after this is done. So I'm going to go ahead and get started so that we can move on with the conversation. And we will start off tonight with introductions of our panelists. And what I'm going to do is I will call on each panelist. I'll have you unmute and I'll have you share your affiliation with the Carbondale community, as well as your background that you have in serving the Carbondale community. And we will start with Carbondale Police Department's Chief, Mr. Stan Reno.
Thank you, Mr. Booth. Good evening, everyone. I'm Stan Reno, the Chief of Police for the Carbondale Police Department. I've been with the department for over 25 years and from Carbondale, and been here all my life. So I'm happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Chief Reno. Deputy Chief Williams.
How you doing? I'm Deputy Chief Tony Williams from the Police Department. I've been here a little over 20 years. I'm over the administrative side of the police department, so I help out with training officers and facilitating things like that and community outreach.
Thanks, Deputy Chief Williams. Youth Detective Lamb.
Yes, sir. Happy to be here. Thank you. I am Detective Brooke Lamb. I am not only a Carbondale police officer, but I am a community member. I do live in the city of Carbondale, but I have been with the department for a little over 18 years, and specifically in the juvenile investigations division for over 15 years.
Thank you, Detective Lamb. From the state's attorney's office, we have Neil Holly. Neil, if you could share.
Hi, I'm Neil Holly. I'm the first assistant state's attorney here in Jackson County. I've been a Carbondale resident since 1994 when I came down here to go to law school. I've been an attorney for 25 years, and I have handled the juvenile docket in Jackson County for more than 15.
Thank you, Mr. Holly. From the Children's Home and Aid Youth Services, Stacy.
Hello, I am Stacy Lau, and I am a supervisor with Children's Home and Aid. We are the new CCBYS agency in the Carbondale and Franklin County area. We just took that over from Egyptian in July, and we are kind of getting our feet wet right now with what we do and who we know down in Franklin County. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Tor Neal, adolescent counselor at Survivors Empowerment Center.
Thank you, Mr. Booth. I am the adolescent counselor for all 8 surrounding counties near Carbondale. I work explicitly with youth, mostly teenagers who have been experiencing or who have experienced sexual assault.
Thank you, Tor. And I think our last panelist was Lindsay, and Lindsay's not made it on yet, correct?
No, I've not seen Lindsay.
All right, perfect. So I will dive on into our question and answer for tonight. I will ask questions that were turned in prior to the meeting, and if our panelists can unmute and share any guidance or direction or wisdom that you have on the topic, that would be amazing. I do not expect every panelist to answer every question because I'm sure that a lot of the answers will be exhausted as we move through, but feel free to share any information that you have on the questions that have been submitted through our co-sponsors and also community members. So our first question for our panelists tonight is, what is the existing response to runaway youth in need of shelter and youth drop-in centers in Carbondale, Illinois? So what is the existing response that we have to youth runaways that are in need of shelter or youth drop-in centers in Carbondale, Illinois? Do any of our sponsors or do any of our panelists have any guidance on that answer?
So I can respond a little bit. As a CCBYS agency, we are contracted to come into the community through the police departments and through the schools. Anytime they have a runaway or homeless youth that they're aware of that's refusing to go home, is unable to go home for whatever reason, we will respond 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to assist in reunification of that family, preservation, and to stabilize that youth with either a family friend or the family of origin if it's safe.
And I'll ask a broad question, or a very broad question that was asked, as to what resources are available for runaway youth in the Carbondale or the Southern Illinois area, just resources in general for the youth, and also for family members that are dealing with youth that run away often, which is something that does occur. Can we share resources for those families and also for those students that are in, or children that are in those situations?
Sure. Again, for us, we provide counseling services to those families after we get the referral, whether it's mandated through a crisis or non-mandated through the schools. Families, anyone from the community can send a referral our way. It is a voluntary program though, so the youth and family has to both agree to services, but we do offer free counseling on a weekly basis to those families.
Well, my office, the state's attorney's office, generally doesn't get involved until after either Ms. Lotz's agency lets us know what's going on. And like she said, it had been Egyptian. We ended up with a pretty good relationship with them, or the police department gets notice that someone's listed as a runaway. So, I mean, their front line, the state's attorney's office is reactionary, but when they come to us, we generally help.
And with the police department, patrol officers are typically the individuals that deal with the kiddos, the runaways, firsthand, when after the parent reports them as a runaway. I think a lot of people don't think that we have services available in Carbondale. However, CCBYS and now Children's Home and Aid, I'm really excited, Stacy, that you're on here. I'm excited to be able to meet with you and network because it was CCBYS. But I'll tell you what, for the community members that don't know, these agencies are tremendous in teaching us, the police department, the resources that they actually have within their agency. You know, these kiddos typically are running away from something or to something, depending on their situation. So me personally, I will take the time, because I have it, whereas patrol officers don't, to find out what's going on in their little lives and maybe what they're dealing with at home or at school or with their friends, to maybe better help them and serve them and their families for that matter. A lot of times families don't know that they can reach out for help. And although we may not have the answers, a lot of times we know who we can call or where we can go to start the ball rolling to help them.
Thank you, Detective Lamb. And there was a bit of a follow-up question to that. What is the response time often with CCBYS when they get involved? How fast does it take? What can people expect once they make that report and the support agency is alerted to the runaway taking place?
So typically our response time is within 2 hours if it is a crisis situation. So crisis situations can be contacted. We can be contacted from the police departments or from the schools. If the school has a youth stating that they're, not feeling safe going home, or if the parent has contacted the school and said, you know what, they don't need to come home after school, they can go somewhere else. Our response time is 2 hours for a mandated crisis situation. For non-mandated crisis or non-mandated referrals that we would get from the community or the families, we have a 48-hour turnaround on calling them back and getting services started.
There were a few of our questions were targeted to youth who may be a part of the LGBTQ plus community. And if there is another level of support for youth that are identify in that realm, and is it delineated, or is it just your services are for youth in general? Or do you find that LGBTQ plus youth need extra services or different services than youth who don't identify with that community?
So our services cover everything, any reason that they are running away, homeless, whatever, we will help them with anything. We do have specialized training for those areas as well. But we are crisis programs. So it's like a 90 day to 6 month program of counseling. So if they're going to need further counseling beyond that, we would refer them out to a more long-term agency.
And maybe just to back up a little bit, and this may be, you know, a police department question, but when you get a call of there being a runaway, can you talk through what that process looks like? And I know Detective Lamb, you share that often patrol officers are the one that are responding to that call. Can you just share what the process looks like when a family calls and says, hey, they haven't been here in 6 or 12 hours, or we don't know where they're at, they're not answering their phone. I see Chief Reno is unmuted. If you could share, Chief Reno, just what that process looks like on your side and how we give family support in those instances.
Sure. So there's not a time range that's any part of the investigation. So if someone's been gone for 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, whatever, we're going to take the report. Obviously, we take the initial information, evaluate the circumstances, and then determine what's going to be the best resources to deploy at that point. Is this a juvenile that's somebody who's a habitual runaway? Is this somebody that's potentially in immediate harm or danger that we need to respond more or deploy more resources for? Is this someone who just simply hasn't been heard from, spent the night somewhere and hasn't come home? Anyway, we take all those circumstances into consideration. Is this a child that we, may know that's at risk for other reasons? So we do all that, but immediately what's done is the officer will respond. Either sometimes we get called in, sometimes we go to a residence, or we meet the person wherever it is their point of choice, and we go there and we meet with them, and we take that information and to include, their physical descriptions, their clothing, who they're friends with, where were they last known to be, do they have a cell phone? Getting all those initial investigative pieces together, then that information is entered into LEADS, which is the law enforcement system that's shared statewide. So that information goes in that this juvenile is a missing person. And so that if law enforcement has contact with that individual, that they will come up listed as missing. And then there's a recovery process that goes from there. But once that initial report is taken, again, if the circumstances aren't such that there seems to be immediate risk or harm, the officers will do the initial follow-up work that they can do. If there's leads on where that child might be, whether, like I said, at a family member's residence or a friend's house, or if there's a cell phone, we can start following up on some of those things. Once those leads are exhausted, we will continue to evaluate the case and determine what additional investigative resources are going to be needed to locate that child. So we'll start checking with the schools. If it's, the night before, the next day, we'll start checking with the schools to determine whether or not they've been at school. Continue to follow up on any leads that we may have. And then we oftentimes will start putting out media releases to get the child's information out there, to get their face and their name out, so that everyone can help us be on the lookout for that person. But I think it's important for everyone to understand is that we have limited resources, right? So we have Detective Lamb, and she is often the one that catches these investigations and follows up on all these missing juveniles. But we also have a great deal of missing persons cases that come into our police department. So all those cases are shared because we have a lot of social resources within the city of Carbondale that unfortunately lead to people being listed as missing. So those are some of the initial steps that are taken. Obviously, the investigations can become much more complex at that point. We may be calling in assistance from other agencies. We may be doing search warrants on phones. we may be doing search warrants on social media accounts, things like that, to try to start tracking down this individual, especially again, if there's a heightened sense of risk or harm for the child.
May I add something?
Sure.
So in addition to all of that, if I learn that the child may have crossed state lines for some reason, which has happened several times, I will immediately make a notification to NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and they require a lot of information. They also are a tremendous resource. They will take pictures, they can track social media in a way that we just don't have the ability or the resources to. They're pretty phenomenal. If we do believe that the child has left to maybe harm himself or herself, we will also get in touch with a program or an agency called NAMIS. It allows us to enter the name and physical description, everything that we have obtained from the reporting party into a database. So that way, if an individual does in fact harm themselves, kill themselves, and we don't have a way of tracking them, that is a way nationally for us to be able to network with other agencies in hopes to locate that individual.
Thank you, Detective Lamb. Any other additions to what occurs when a runaway is reported to the police and what their process is? I think that is helpful for people to know. Obviously, the family has firsthand knowledge of what's going on just through the police department's communication with them, but oftentimes others don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Could you add, from the police department perspective, once that report is made, once there's potentially after how much ever time goes on, there's social media posts, there's news coverage. Behind the scenes, there's also just looking for tips and actively searching for the youth, or even passively searching through notifying patrol and just having an eye out, correct?
Absolutely. That it continues to stay on it as an active investigation, and we continue to follow all possible leads. But, some kids, if they don't want to be found, they can make it very difficult for us. So, I have to, every day we triage cases and, what investigations are the most important at that time. And missing juveniles are always something we talk about on a regular basis. Just for some points of reference, last year we took 36 missing juvenile cases. So you figure, 3 a month or almost 1 a week. And those are the ones that we documented and that went into complete investigations. There's other calls that we've taken about missing juveniles that maybe they're located fairly immediately that don't get documented in such a way that makes these statistics. And so far this year, we've investigated 16 missing juveniles. So it's something that we deal with on a regular, ongoing basis, and we know the importance of it. Sometimes I think families may get frustrated because we're not able to immediately, locate where the child might be. But again, it's challenging. If somebody's trying to truly hide out for a while, it takes us a while to start making those investigative leads and talking to people and figuring out, who last saw them, where they were last at, making those connections to get that information. And of course, that all hinges on the cooperation of those that we're trying to get that information from. So lots of challenges, but we want to make sure that we prioritize our youth and to make sure that they're safe.
And Chief Reno, of those 36 last year, all recovered?
All recovered. We do not, as of today, we just had one today. As a matter of fact, all of our missing juveniles have been recovered. And, we're thankful for that, of course, because, it's just as easy as those statistics can be positive that we've recovered them, they could just as easily go wrong, right? Because there's a lot of risks out there. And we know that when they're not in the proper care and people are able to watch after them and take responsibility for them, that puts them at risk.
So the 36 last year, 100% recovery rate, and then the 16 this year, 100% as well so far? Or I know you said you had one a day.
Well, yeah, we had one
recovered
her, yes. So now we've had some that have been, unfortunately, that we've taken months to locate. and as Detective Lamb indicated, especially when you start talking about kids that move across state lines, and then some of these, you got to consider all the circumstances, right? So a lot of these might be domestic family issues, where a child is taken by another custodial parent that's listed as missing. And that becomes a real challenge, right? So we have a parent that may leave the state, may travel the country, or maybe even out of the country, that makes those things very, very difficult. So we see all types of different cases and circumstances, and we try to adapt and use all available resources for each of those investigations.
And Chief, though, that data, that was a calendar year, correct? January to December?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Okay. I know
In
we had a
addition
question.
to what becomes difficult is the fact that we have Gateway, and they house juveniles there from all over the state. And when they are addicted to drugs and they leave because it's not a lockdown facility, that presents a huge problem for us, because they are very savvy at finding drugs and getting out of the facility and away from where people are going to actually track them. In addition, we have the neurorestorative
That's where I was going. Thank you, Brooke.
neurorestorative facility. So you've got kiddos that are brain injured that don't think rationally. So we're dealing with intellectual disabilities and kiddos that run away, and they are seeking something, some sort of attention. They may just want to get out of the house, and they just don't know the severity of the outside world from the neurorestorative house where they're safe. So that also presents yet another problem for us.
That's also not the entire population at neurorestorative, though. And the other half of the population sometimes drags the ones that you were talking about into leaving with them, and then it really gets complicated.
And those facilities are included within the data that was given, Chief?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
I think those are great points, and it's something that we didn't think about. We don't think about when we think about data, statistics, and the numbers, is the fact that Carbondale is such a support community. When we think about the neurorestorative, which seems like their houses a new house and a new structures popping up for them like every 6 months. They're just growing and growing and growing. And Gateway, which it's a youth are ordered to go to Gateway, but there's not like they've got locks on the doors, or it is voluntary for them to stay. It's like, you can go here or we will send you here. And we've served some of those students at the school level as well. And they can walk off of Park Street whenever they are ready to, and it is that facility's responsibility to report them, but they're not chasing after them, to say, get back over here.
Yes, and Centerstone has also had juvenile residential programs. Somebody mentioned Brim. We don't have as many from Brim, but that's another consideration. But I always try to keep things in perspective too, and I'm very thankful for the work of Detective Lamb. I mean, you talk about 36 juveniles in a year. She's involved in all 36 of those cases, and that's on top of everything else. And so I always try to keep the perspective for everyone. We have 3 detectives, and one of them is Detective Lamb. So these are very taxing cases, and we put a lot of time and resources into every one of them.
Yeah, we appreciate that, and we appreciate Detective Lamb. We know that it is that brain does not get to turn off when you walk out of that station at night. So I know it's heavy. The next question, and I know there's been some in the chat on this, but it was also on the list, so I'll go this direction. It says, what role do schools play in supporting youth who may be at risk for runaway or that do run away? And I will share that, one of the things that we work really, really hard on is ensuring that we aren't surprised about what's going on with our students, because our school, specifically Carbondale Community High School, it is a microcosm of the Carbondale community. It truly, truly is. Our community members have kids that come to the high school, and whatever they see at home, whatever they deal with at home, we can deal with it at the school as well. And we have to keep our finger on it. But if there is a runaway that is a high school student, we are usually contacted immediately in some way, shape, or form just to let us know from an information standpoint. And I know one of the comments in the chat was there are times when runaway students or runaway youth, they may run away from home, but they may show up to school that next day. And that is a very common thing that does occur. I can think of 2 instances when it occurred last year. And in those instances, our administration or our school resource officer will make contact with the student just to say, hey, you're listed as a runaway, what's going on? We will contact the parent, we'll let them know. And what we found a lot of times is they end up showing up at school because they know that, number one, they're going to eat. They will walk in there in the morning and they will get breakfast and they'll get a snack and they'll get lunch. And that's a big deal. And I can think of one specific case last year where there was a young male who was listed as a runaway. He came to school around 11:30, 12 o'clock. And we were able to make contact with the mother. We were able to let him know he was here and that he was safe. And the next thing after we made those calls that student asked for was, can he get a tray? Can he eat? And it's just the reality of it. And it wasn't that specific situation wasn't a situation where the student was abused at home or was trying to get away from, a bad situation. It was actually that student trying to get away from having law and order in his home, not leaving the house after 9 o'clock, being grounded because of his grades or his actions or his trouble at school. And it was like, and it does get to a point where whether we've got a lot of students that are staying with their grandparents, we got a lot of students that are staying with their aunts and uncles. We've got a lot of students whose parents, I think we had an incident last year where, a student ended up being a runaway of some sort because, he was being asked to do increased duties at home because the parent had to work. And it was like, hey, you're 17. I need you to take care of your 3 younger brothers and sisters. I need you to get them on the bus. I need you to get them off the bus. I need you to make sure they've got lunch, dinner. I need you to make sure they get their homework done. And this kid's like, I just want to be a 16 or 17-year-old. Like I can't do my work because I got to help them with their work. I got to get out of here. This is not my job. That was a situation that happened last year. And so these situations occur for more than kids, wanting to be promiscuous or them wanting to be, them wanting to be defiant. There are some situations where they just want to be a kid and they feel like they're being neglected and they don't know the answer to their neglect being solved by staying in their home. But they do have willing individuals that will take them in to support them in some situations. So once we do find in the school that we do have a runaway, if they do come to school, we make all contacts that are needed. And then we try to bring some sort of restoration to their needs in the school environment. Because our students, you'd be surprised, we open our doors at 7:30 in the morning and we often don't close them till about 6 o'clock. And we've got students that want to stay there until like we're pushing them out the door. And it's like, what's the next place for them to go? Fortunately, we've got the Boys and Girls Club. We've got, community entities that can take them on. But sometimes, we've got students that they just don't feel like home is the best place or the safe place for them in situations. So we're fortunate at Carbondale Community High School. We've got 4 school counselors. I heard Mickey Weaver talk earlier about a new social worker that we hired. We're going from 1 social worker last year. This year, we'll have 3 social workers in our building just for these types of things. So that's a big jump to go from 1 to 3 in 1 year. And then we have 2 positions called restorative practice support specialists. So we've got 4 counselors, 3 social workers, and 2 restorative practice support specialists whose job is to support kids in any way, shape, or form. Our counselors and social workers provide counseling and social services, connections to our community organizers, assisting them with getting food on Fridays, clothing that's needed. Our restorative practice support specialists are the ones that go knock on our doors. If a kid is truant or they're tardy or they're not coming to school, we want to go to them to say, hey, we need you in here. Support our families in doing that as well. So that's where we're at on the school side in assisting in those things. And our support systems are 100% only growing at Carbondale Community High School. And that's as a result of the need growing. And every single time we have a resignation or a retirement, one of my jobs is to look at our needs and reassess. We don't just post positions because we've always had it. We reassess what our needs are now as we move forward, because our students show that they have those needs. The next question that I'll go to, and this is once again to our first responders, specifically our police. Can you please share what training our officers have in responding to runaway situations? I know that this question was once again specific towards our queer identified runaway, but you can correct me if I'm wrong if your supports are the same for all individuals, regardless of their identification. But can you just share the training that our first responders have, and then maybe even go into a bit of some of the youth support that has just come on through the city's work with the Stress and Trauma Center?
Sure. So, like as I initially indicated, the response is going to be, the officer will obviously go and meet and get the initial information, and then start assessing from there what our continued investigative response needs to be. So it's really just evaluating and triaging that information and determining, what's the next best step. And then do we need to call in investigators? Do we need to call in additional resources? But these are things that are trained in the very basic level when officers begin at the Carbondale Police Department. It's a basic investigative skills that we train them on. And then there's additional steps that are taken as far as a runaway or missing person is concerned, about data entry, and the facts that are collected and things of that nature. But you mentioned our youth advocate and the Stress and Trauma Center. That's something that we prioritized about a year ago, that we knew that we saw a need for, that we knew that we needed some additional services, some wraparound services beyond when we have contact with the family, beyond when we are fortunate enough to recover that juvenile, to know that there's additional needs there, right? There's a reason that child left, whatever that reason may be. And Detective Lamb kind of went through some of that. And we wanted to be able to provide those additional services there. And as you know, Mr. Booth, we communicate with the schools, depending on which school that they're in, to make sure that they're getting services through the schools, all the things that you just listed and referenced. And then our youth advocate will also do follow-up services, make referrals to counseling if needed, or other services that are identified that could be helpful to that child or the family. So we continue to try to identify what we can do to provide the best services and be responsive to the needs of the community. And we recognize, especially with our youth, that there are some additional steps that need to be taken. And these are all things that, are beyond what our law enforcement officers do or what Detective Lamb does. These are additional, more one-on-one services that we are helping to provide, to try to heal that family and try to, create a healthy living environment for the whole family, and so that youth feels safe and secure at home.
I would add too, I think the majority, I'm pretty sure, of our officers are now juvenile officer certified. We're trying to get that accomplished early on in all the officers' careers, so that they have a better understanding of how the interactions with a juvenile is different from the interactions with an adult. And of course, within that, all of those components of family violence and how that affects youth differently than adults is all there, whatever kind of violence that is. And then obviously we do, by mandate, by law, those things are increasing. We've always been pretty good about having training situated at least 1 to 2 times a year about things like cultural competency, bias awareness training, things like that. We've had speakers from in the community, from outside the community, that have come in to talk about awareness of the different, the various cultural competencies that police officers have to be aware of. And, I think luckily in this city, it doesn't take our officers long to experience the kind of diversity that just makes them better at dealing with diversity. Quite frankly, they're not, I think our officers have become pretty adept at recognizing that every situation is different. Every kid's background is different. And we do our best to try to throw them into training as well to help them be the best we can be.
Thank you for that, Chief Reno and Deputy Chief Williams. Switching gears here a little bit, and we do know that there are situations where there are lockouts that occur due to students that have unruly behavior or that are exhibiting risky behaviors. First off, when we say the word lockout, I know many may not know what that terminology means. Can I have one of our panelists just share the terminology and what it means for a child to be locked out with the community?
I can explain it from our perspective, and then if anybody wants to follow up from theirs. Our perspective, a lockout type of a case is when either the parent or the guardian is refusing to allow that juvenile to come back into the home, or they're refusing to take care of them or bring them back in, or the juvenile themselves is refusing to go back home and will not go back with the parent or guardian. So we have a situation in which, we need to find placement. And then that's at that point that we would either contact youth services or we'd contact DCFS or both, depending on the circumstances, to help us at that point. Either one they come in and try to establish a resolution. They obviously want to get that child back in the safest environment possible, or find placement for the child if that's necessary.
Stacey, did you have anything to add on that? I saw you.
I figured I'd let
shaking.
Stacey jump in there, then I'll jump in.
Okay, so yeah, along with not allowing them to return back to the home, the family typically does not assist in finding placement for that youth either. So that's part of that lockout process. If they're refusing to allow the youth to go to like an extended family member's home or a friend's home for the night, anything like that, if they're uncooperative at all, then it's considered a lockout process.
And I think it's important, Neil, I'll jump ahead of you just a second and you may follow up on this too, is that we have the ability to take juveniles into protective custody. So if we make the determination that there's not a safe environment for them to go back to, then we'll take them into protective custody and then also ask for the youth services to come in and help us find placement for the child. And then there's circumstances beyond that that Neil will speak to that involves the judicial system.
Right. When a child's locked out, as Chief Reno said, sometimes it's because of actions of the parents, and sometimes it's because of actions of the child themselves. And there's several ways once it gets to the state's attorney level that I can do. If it's a situation where it's just the parents saying, I don't want to be a parent anymore, and refusing to allow their child home for no real reason, well, that's neglect. And a neglect petition is filed. And we have hearings and get stuff in place to take care of the child. The other one where, and the chief mentioned this too, where the youth is just out of control and the parents can't control them anymore, and they've tried this and they've tried this and they've tried this and nothing works. And then finally, and usually there's younger children in the home that child is putting at risk, and then the parents are like, this isn't safe for the other children, you can't come back home. There's a thing in the Juvenile Court Act of 1987 called a no-fault dependency case, which means that through no fault, lack of concern, or responsibility of the parent, the child simply can't be cared for in the home anymore. And then that's when DCFS is involved, and that's when my office is involved. And through that system, we try to find the safest place for the child. And neither one of those are good, but it's nice to know that there is, in fact, multiple ways once it makes it to the legal system to help these children and the families in that case. So
thank you, Neil. And that is a good segue into kind of the crux of the question is I know that there have been situations where We've had parents who a lot of times have multiple children in the house, and a child gets to the teenage age, or even moving out of the teenage age, and they just refuse to follow rules at home. I've seen this in single parent homes. I've seen this in dual parents homes, and I've seen this in non-traditional homes where grandparents are raising youth. Do we have any advice that we can give to families that are in that situation where they have an unruly or disobedient youth who refuses to follow rules, and it almost becomes unsafe to the individuals in the house for that youth to be there? Any advice for families in that situation?
Daniel, I get those calls all the time. And I feel those phone calls. If I'm doing something else, that is a call that gets returned within hours. And then I direct the parents is what to do. I mean, your step is to call DCFS. And then once, as bad as it sounds, a lot of times when those 4 letters get thrown out there, parents and families go, whoa, I don't want that agency up in my business. But that agency helps. That agency really does good. And when it gets to that point, unless I know about it and unless DCFS knows about it, nobody's going to help. Because that's, I mean, I think that's a little even past your spot in it now, Stacy. Because you know the 25-day lockout thing, it's different in that situation. But my phone's open all the time for those situations. I mean, that's my job. It's what I do, and
it's not uncommon.
I'm a good first start.
It's not uncommon for us to have families that they're in crisis, and they'll call daily almost. And as they watch their child or the juvenile walk out of the house, they'll call the police department and report them missing. And we will have a juvenile reported missing multiple times over multiple days, and it becomes a habitual runaway situation. Oftentimes that requires Mr. Hawley to file some court intervention paperwork that the court does become involved at that point. Maybe probation has to become involved. Other services are out there, but that's worst case scenario, but that's when a family is truly in crisis. But that's not uncommon, unfortunately.
So we provide services to those families. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. We do provide services to those families prior to that crisis moment. So if they're having trouble like that, anybody in the community, any of the family members can contact our agency and do a referral for them. That's our 48 to 72 hour turnaround rate on that to get their cases open and start counseling services, start helping however we can in that family to keep them unified and to keep those kids out of the justice system and out of the DCFS system. That's our intent.
I think too, especially it used to be, we often got calls, and I've instructed officers to be wary of this. Parents often want the police to come in and scare their children into behaving. And, I think we used to hear that a lot, and I think it's less, and officers have quickly figured out, our goal is not to have children be afraid of us. We want the children to respect their parents in a right way. And so I think we often target so much of the responsibility or the angst at the child. And even speaking from my own experience, sometimes you need help in learning how to parent. And that's getting the parents involved in family counseling. The Stress and Trauma Center that our youth victim advocate works through, we've been able to refer, and even when LaSharia was back there, we referred quite a few people to stress and trauma as well, not just for the youth to be counseled, but for the parents as well, and to help work out how can I better manage my child's behavior. So I think that's a critical part of it.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that and to kind of go over a few of these questions that have popped up, we do offer home-based services. So we come to the families. We don't expect you to come to our office. We come to you, whatever's convenient for them. And then also as far as the ages, we start as young as 11 and go up to age 18 with our CCBYS services and counseling services. Prior to age 11, unfortunately, DCFS has to get involved when it comes to like a lockout or crisis situation. However, for counseling, we would refer them out to other agencies who do younger kids like that.
I also want to advocate for some prevention measures because that's where I come in a lot with counseling. The best thing a parent can do is have another safe adult in a child's life. So someone who is not the caregiver, someone who is not the guardian, and that may be difficult for you, an older sibling, a cousin, your best friend, an aunt, an uncle, a therapist, a counselor for them to go to. Because chances are something else is happening and they're not comfortable coming to the caregiver or the guardian, and that's hard to take, and that doesn't say anything about your parenting. Just think about when you were a teenager and mom and dad would never understand. So part of creating a safe space where runaways don't happen is allowing your kiddo to talk through things with other people. I am fortunately that person for a lot of kids. If you don't know, in Illinois, anyone who's above 12 can come to a sexual assault counselor without telling their parents. And a lot of my clients do not tell their parents because they're not ready or they don't know how. But because they come to me, we prevent a lot of running away. We talk through how to talk to parents because kiddos don't have the skills to sit down and have a hard conversation with adults. That's pretty scary, but especially scary when it's your like mom or your dad or whoever's taking care of you at home. So a lot of this can be solved with like simply having another safe adult who would come to you if there was a problem with your kiddo.
Thank you for that, Tor.
Tor,
Dr.
yeah, I
Lamb?
really appreciate you saying that because I think that is one of the most important aspects of these runaway kiddos. So thank you. A lot of people don't know that. And I think the majority of the people that don't know that and don't want to accept that information are the parents, because what do they immediately become defensive and say, why didn't you tell me? You know, we have a close relationship. You know, I would listen to you. However, some of the kiddos that we're dealing with have disclosed to family members or to the parents, and they haven't been believed. They've been told they're liars. They've been told they're making it up because they're trying to get attention or something of that nature. So I'm really appreciative that you said that. Thank you.
So I've got one more question that I'll ask, then I'll go to questions that are within our chat and that other folks have. So we've talked about a couple different categories of youth runaways or incidents that occur. One of them being, you know, students that or youth that are maybe in just a tough situation at home. Some of them may be those that are disobedient. And then you've got kind of this bucket of youth who are participating in some sort of risky behaviors. I guess the question to the panelists who have worked with youth from all over Southern Illinois, and specifically in Carbondale, has anyone seen an uptick in specific behaviors, risky behaviors that adults should be on the lookout for when parenting or when leading youth within their homes? Are there specific risky behaviors that have kind of bubbled to the top more recently than in the past that families should be on the lookout for?
Absolutely. I think that we all know that electronic devices in the hands of our children is something that shouldn't be happening, because we are allowing them into a world that they have no business in. If there was a safe way for them to get onto an electronic device and predators not, reach into their electronic device and try to get at them, that would be great, but that's not the case. It is so easy for our kids to become victimized. So what I tell parents when they call me and say, hey, I found pictures of, my 13-year-old that are inappropriate. She's sending these pictures to someone that I've never met before. She met him online. What should I do? And my first immediate response is, you've got to take the electronic device away from them so they don't have access to it there. However, we do know they're going to find access in other places. They're going to go to a friend's house. They have a computer. They can go to the public library and have access. Not that they're going to have access to predators there because of, firewalls and stuff like that. However, parents don't want to take those electronic devices away from their children. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that is huge because kiddos are taking images of themselves naked or their private areas and sending them to random people, not even necessarily their friends. And they don't think that that's going to be followed with some pretty severe consequences.
And Detective Lamb, I think one comment to make on that as well is there are predators out there who offer money for that, that offer just company or seek company, which may lead to the runaway situation as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, when they're looking for attention or any void that they have in their lives, it is so easy to find it through an electronic device. So parents need to be aware of that. And when it comes to drug use, I very frequently tell parents, you know what, they're not paying to stay in your house. So you can go in their room. I mean, yeah, we need to be respectful of it, but go into their room and look for, the drugs, look for contraband, look for paraphernalia, whatever it is that they think the children might be involved in, and then try to have a conversation about it.
Thank you. Other risky behaviors that we've seen kind of an uptick. I know it was mentioned in the chat by Ms. Henry about, just the social deprivation that occurred during COVID and how, everybody had a laptop, everybody had Wi-Fi, everybody, had the opportunity to just surf and get into things. But any other risky behaviors that we're seeing an uptick in? I'll share from just things that we saw that we probably didn't expect last year at the high school. And I think that this is probably a mix of just our current environment in the state of Illinois with the legalization of marijuana and the availability of it. And it is providing major tax dollars, but it's also providing major avenues of access. And it's not, when I was growing up, it was like you could tell when someone just smoked marijuana, but these days it's in bags of candy, it's edible. It looks like regular chips, it looks like regular Sour Patch Kids, it looks like regular everything. And there's just a lot of risk with it. And we did see more students having access to edible marijuana in the last year that you almost had to take a double take to ensure that those weren't a regular bag of hot Cheetos, or those weren't regular Sour Patch Kids, or those weren't regular whatever, because they had access to it, and we had our eyes peeled to be able to help with that. But that's a risk of behavior that is increasing.
Just to kind of dovetail that, we saw it, and I used to work in narcotics just not too terribly long ago. And when we saw the cannabis kind of industry explode with that, one of the things we've also seen, and I think hospital folks would vouch for me on this, is a pretty big growth in the amount of like kind of drug-induced psychosis, where there are people who don't realize that the levels of THC that are in some of these, especially the edibles, but this is not the same cannabis that existed 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. It's incredibly highly concentrated, and we're seeing kids that are going through some incredibly violent struggles, and it's having long-term effects. The hospitalization as a result of just usually cannabis or cannabis edibles has just really gone up. So it's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, well, and it's my old health teacher background. I mean, I think what the lack of understanding of the science behind it hurts. You know, when you are ingesting something, it's not a quick high. So if you don't get high quick, what do most kids do? They keep on eating more. Like, I need to feel this. I need to feel it. You know, and then it all hits them at once, and it's not a pretty scene. But any other, as we begin to transition to questions, any other risky behaviors that we're seeing more of that adults should be looking out for when parenting or leading our youth these days?
Yeah, I've seen an uptick in self-harm in particular.
It's true.
It's unfortunate. It's not a sign of suicidality. It's just like a bad coping skill, which most people don't hear and understand, which means they could find good coping skills like listening to music or painting, and can be helped with things like therapy or counseling. But what you're looking for with kiddos in your life, or your own kiddos, would be a change in behavior. So either more social, less social, always on the phone, never on the phone, always alone, never alone. Just extremes and changes would be a good indicator that something is going on.
Okay, I thank you so much to our panelists for answering those questions. You're not done yet, though. We've got some questions in the chat box that I am going to work to go through. And honestly, I'm not going to read them. What I'm going to do is I am going to ask, I'm going to call on those who ask the questions, and you can unmute yourself to ask your questions so that we can hear your wonderful voice. So Chastity Mays, I saw you had a question in here at about 7:08. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there may be some resources out there that the community or families may need to know that we didn't talk about tonight.
I can say that I'm not a panelist, this is Jess from Racial Justice Coalition. One person that we had hoped to have on the panel this evening, and we'll get some information to send out to our co-sponsors so that folks can learn more about it. The Knights Shield has a homeless youth grant. And I think that is a resource that probably the state's attorney's office and the police department and Children's Home and Aid have referred to at times. So we'll get some information out to folks. I'm sure something came up and they were unable to attend.
Yeah, that's up in West Frankfort. That's a really, really helpful organization. They help in a lot of instances.
And I'll always say, contact your schools. The social workers there, the administrators, they've got good relationships with kids, and they can help. And even if they are not the direct assistants, they can often direct you or be a middleman or middle person into assisting the support network. So I would also try there. Pastor Karen, I saw you had a question in here.
I just wanted to, one of the reasons we put this together, that it was put together, was through some personal experiences there were community members felt some holes in the system. And so I'm sort of passing the buck and asking if there are folks or maybe even some of the professionals who are on saying, okay, we're getting together, we're talking. What are the areas we need to tend to? One of the things I heard was that responses from sometimes response to Runaways is different in the summer than when school is in session. And how can that be more unified? But that may not be the only issue. It's just such a gift to have so many folks together, and it would be important. We're learning a lot about what each of you do, but it's also important to say, how can we, are there problems and how can we fix them?
My opinion, I think the difference between the summer versus the school year, we have everybody in school and the staff members are well aware what kids show up to school, you know, what kiddos are regular attendees, what's going on in their lives. Whereas during the summer, they don't know what's going on in their kiddos' lives. We know a little bit more just because we're having maybe regular visits at the house if the parents are calling, if the kids are unruly, if they are running away. That's just my opinion. I don't know if someone else has a different opinion about that difference.
I think you're absolutely right, Detective Lamb. I know anecdotally anyway, especially even during COVID when all the kids didn't go to school, a lot of, I don't know how exactly our jurisdiction panned out, but I know in many, especially the bigger jurisdictions, the DCFS calls or child services calls plummeted because there weren't teachers and administrators who were seeing these kids every day to identify abuse and to identify malnutrition and things like that. So, you know, no kid wants to go to school all year long and no teacher wants to teach all year long. But, you know, if we can have these kids engaged in some programs in the summer and, you know, certainly just having some, you know, responsible adults around that can pay attention to kids that may not get much attention at home is huge. So you're right about the summertime.
You're absolutely right, Tony. We lost the access to 90% of first or mandated reporters that are the ones that usually bring that stuff to you guys and then to me. So yeah, you're right.
I think it's important. I agree with everything, but I think it's also important to remind everyone, especially the high school, Mr. Booth can speak to this more, but there are a number of programs that are still offered during the summertime for kids, especially kids that needs services and help with things. And I know he has a number of his staff that work throughout the year that are available to help us, to help kids that have, you know, special needs.
Let's not forget the Boys and Girls Club because they're phenomenal in taking in kiddos that need something to do in the summertime, right, Tina? So we appreciate you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you. I do want to point out that during when the kids were not in the classroom, and yes, the mandated reports did drop, but we saw an uptick in mandated reports. I mean, we were doing mandated reports on a weekly basis, whereas before, you know, it was maybe once a month but I mean, but luckily we were also able to really communicate with the teachers because, I mean, we had to all be working together because they were in our club while the teachers were on the screens for the kids. But we definitely saw a huge uptick in mandated reports because we had the kids 10 to 12 hours a day.
For those that don't realize this, but when we were fully remote, the Boys and Girls Club, in understanding that many parents still had to work, and they opened their doors and they had dozens upon dozens of students in their gymnasium at tables and different grade levels doing remote learning at the Boys and Girls Club. You know, so it was, you talk about flexibility and support and just doing what you have to do. They definitely did that. And I'm not surprised that fostered an environment where they would be available to students that, you know, were in need. Jessica Bradshaw, saw you had a question, then we'll go to Emily Stafford. Is Jessica still on?
Yeah,
There you go.
yeah, sorry, had to find the unmute. I think it was answered about, I had a couple questions, one about younger kids, and then I guess another concern is just what, but I think that was answered. The other question is about families who may be transitory, you know, living in hotel rooms, things like that. What kind of resources are there for those children?
That's a great question, Jess. And I will share just on the homeless front. We help a ton with homeless students. We actually applied for a grant last year at the high school level, and I know the elementary has money set aside, in our regional office of education in Murfreesboro also assists us with funding for our homeless students. They do have an extra set of rights where they can eat for free, they don't pay fees, and there's also opportunities at school where we get them food, if not weekly, more than weekly. We ensure they have coats, shoes, clean clothes. Even if we have to wash clothes for students, we do that. But even with the situation at Georgetown Apartments, District 95 and the high school has worked together to figure out which families there have students that are high school aged or elementary aged. We are in contact with them to figure out, I know the middle school hosted just a fair to assist those families, but we were also available to assist them with first and last month's rent. I know the city's going to be stepping up to help out with U-Haul trucks and moving. So, it really shows just really how I can't think of a time where someone's needed something and they've asked and that need has been brought up where someone hasn't stepped up to assist. And we had many instances last year when we talk about the transient population, where we have families reach out and say, hey, we're staying in this hotel and we are looking for a place. We're homeless and we still can't find anything. And we don't have any money to pay for this next week's assistance. And that call comes to my office and my business manager gets a check and we pay for their next week of hotel stay. So those types of things, when I say that it's important that the school knows what's going on, we want kids to be able to come here to learn and not have to worry about all that other stuff. And we want this to be a safe place for people. And sometimes that does mean figuring out how to pay for things. And we've been pretty successful in figuring it out in some way, shape, or form.
That's
Mr.
great.
Booth,
Thank
can
you.
I'm sorry.
Yep, go ahead. No problem, Jessica. Detective Lamb.
I was just going to ask if we could speak to our monthly meeting that we have so the community knows about that.
Yeah, so we've got a monthly meeting where we do talk about youth who just need support in some way, shape, or form. And I think it was Tor who talked about being proactive rather than reactive. Anything that we can do in a proactive sense to support students. And we often, we include DCFS in those meetings because we want to make sure that we know what families have had a DCFS contact in the last month to ensure that there's counseling and social services available for students and families in those situations to support them. So you're absolutely right, Detective Lamb. I've got Emily on here, and then I want to go to Mickey. I see you unmuted, so I'm gonna let you go next, Mickey. Emily Stafford, I saw you had a question.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Booth. It's really kind of a follow-up question now to Ms. Louts. So thanks for your response in the chat to the question about any kind of home-based family therapy being offered. And I guess my question to you is whether your organization or any other local organizations in Carbondale do any kind of ongoing, I'm not sure if you just do kind of the assessment piece in the home, or if there's anybody doing ongoing home-based, something like multi-systemic therapy that's longer term with families, to try to help increase parenting skills and, in dealing particularly with youth who are acting out or have delinquent kinds of behaviors.
Programs we do offer that those services in the home for anywhere from 90 days to 6 months. Beyond that, we would resource that out to other agencies. And I'm not sure, unfortunately, I don't have as many resources yet for your area as far as long-term facilities and what they offer, if it's in-home services or not. But I can get that information, or at least try to find some.
With regard to you mentioned delinquency, there's an organization that's run out of Anna, Illinois. It's called Redeploy Illinois, and they offer in-home parenting. They offer services for the kids. They offer almost every one of those things that you mentioned, but from my understanding, that's only accessible for kids that are in the delinquency system. I don't think redeploy is available just to help families in general, but we send many, many, many youth from this area and their families to deal with Redeploy Illinois. It's a really good outfit.
So I can answer a little bit. We have redeploy up in our northern counties, St. Clair, Madison area in Illinois. And yeah, it's court ordered and court mandated. So we don't take referrals from just anyone on that. It has to be court mandated, but it is a great program for that.
Our youth advocate couldn't be here tonight. She had a prior obligation, and she could probably fill you in on more, but she's actually stationed at the police department through kind of a grant through the Stress and Trauma Center, which is located up in, I think, El Dorado is where it's based out of, but they've got some folks down here that they do. And I don't know if Detective Lamb, if you know any more details, but I know they do home visits, and they do family counseling. So, and then some of those extended services. So I can't speak to all the details, but networking like this is good too. Meeting new resources and making those connections. We're trying to do that both on the youth side and the mental health side too. We've got a lot of initiatives. We're trying to get all our resources all together and share that information, because I think that's one of the things that's kind of fallen off over the last couple of years too. There's been changes, there's been movements, and people haven't been able to come together. So we're trying to get back everyone together in these networks to help bring services, as we call it, the wraparound services around these kids and around these folks.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Good to see you, class of 1970, CCHS. Mickey, I know you were next. I can imagine you're over there searching for the unmute. There it goes. Go ahead, Mickey.
I really have two questions. Mainly, you all have talked about families who are somewhat functional and can report their children as missing, but you have this really dysfunctional group who don't care or don't know where their kids are. How do their kids get in the system? The parents haven't called the police and said, my kid is missing. And a lot of times people let their kids come in and they couch hop from one couch to the next. And I don't know if people realize that may be illegal to take in someone's child who is a runaway. So could you address what happens to those families who don't report their kids?
Well, Mickey, unfortunately, most of those kids come into the system through delinquency, through committing some sort of crime. And that's how we find them. Well, that's how law enforcement finds them, and that's how they come to me. And yes, there is a crime called harboring a runaway, and it is a criminal offense. But okay, the details of that are probably too much for this panel.
And can I say this? I used to work with Adolescent Health Center. I had to go to court one day, and the judge, and a lot of times parents don't realize this, I'm not going to let you stay in my house if you don't follow my rules from A to Z. And the judge told the father, you may not let them stay in your house, but you have to find them somewhere else to live. And so that maybe some parents don't realize that they don't have the authority to not let their minor kids stay there. And one more thing, we were brainstorming one night. We have a place for warming who don't have people who are homeless, a warming center, a place where people have been abused. I'm thinking we need a safe house for kids in the area, instead of going all over Benton and going wherever else they go. You say, this is a place I can go for a night or two, maybe even a week. That's what I'm kind of visualizing. I'll stop talking.
Thank you, Mickey. So I see some discussion in the chat, and just for a time check, we've got about 13 minutes left. So we'll probably have a couple more questions, but I see some comments in the chat, and one of the last questions I had on here was about parenting help. And one thing that I'll share just real quick, and we talked about the effect of the pandemic, and we've talked about the need for counseling services. And I can't think of how many questions we've answered today with providing services, providing counseling, there is a shortage right now of counselors in our community. There is an extreme, you talk about an epidemic, there is a shortage of them. If you look on job employment opportunities for the center stones of our community, the Shawnee Healths of our community, if you even look for school districts that are looking for school counselors and social workers, whether they are licensed or not, clinical, whether it's school social work, whether it is community-based, everyone is looking to hire a counselor or a social worker right now. Some of those organizations like Centerstone aren't even looking for the individual to have a degree in counseling or social work. They're looking for degrees in related fields and hoping to train them to be able to support families. So I'll share, if you know someone that's looking for a job, you know someone that's looking to move into this community, they're looking to be involved in the community, there are opportunities in that field. I know, for instance, last year we had such a backlog of families and students that needed counseling and support services that we couldn't fill the need, period. We could not fill the need because there were not enough counselors and social workers to go around. Thus, the reason why we posted positions to hire into our district so that we didn't have to go outside to get it. We wanted them in-house in some way, shape, or form. So I just wanted to share that with folks. I want to transition to Dr. Lacey, Dr. Ella Lacey, who is on here, and she's got a few questions that I know she's put in here privately. And Dr. Lacey, I'm gonna give you the microphone. I'll share again, we've got about 11 minutes till 8 o'clock, which will respect everyone's time. But Dr. Lacey, I want to give you a moment to be able to ask a couple of the questions that you shared with me personally on here.
All right, thank you, Mr. Booth. I hope I can pick out the ones I had. One, a couple of things were just details that maybe if we could address those, it would help us. So it would make us kind of go back a little bit to talk about what is the difference and what is the overlap between a runaway child and a missing child? Is that something that parents and community people really need to know about? And then if it's any overlap there with an abducted child, a coerced child, not to give us a whole, big discourse on it, but just so we kind of understand that maybe there are some categories related to that that keep you from doing certain things or whatever. I think that's Chief Reno probably would be best at addressing that.
Sure.
Thank you.
For us, it's really just a part of that investigative piece to determine what the circumstances are to best evaluate what our response is going to be. So a majority of the cases that we have are runaways, and and that title is somewhat misleading because sometimes it's just a teenage child that hasn't returned home on time, or the parent hasn't heard from them, or there's some underlying concern that they've not been able to get in touch with them and they want to report it to law enforcement. So it's at that point that we'll make the determination of, how do we proceed from there? Now, if it's an abduction or a very young child, for instance, 10 and under or something that's missing or walked away, that obviously is our response. And we will be getting that information out to the community to say, we have a missing child and we need the community's help to find them right away because they are at risk, as opposed to a 16-year-old that just didn't come home last night. All important, but certainly individually call for different types of responses. So missing, runaway, for us, it's legal classifications that we have to put in for our reporting standards. But it really, for us, it just really varies on what our investigative response will be.
All right. Thank you very much. But Chief Reno, also the question about the point you made about the 36 children last year who were runaways. I think I have the right term. Just for statistical clarity, is that 36 different children, or could that be a number like 30 children where 5 or 6 of them were out there more than one time? So the count becomes 36 based on incidences, or is it just on the person?
So it could be a child that has been reported more than once. But regardless if they've been reported once or 5 times, each individual investigation of when they're reported missing is handled individually and handled just as important and evaluated just as important as the first time or the 5th time. But you're right, it could be a same child reported on multiple different occasions, but they're each considered in an individual investigation because, oftentimes, as I'm sure you're getting at, is that these types of things escalate, right? So the first time it may just been a defiance, I'm not coming home by curfew. The second time might be now I'm gone for 3 or 4 days, and then it just builds and the problems get more and more complex, which is why we have found it so important to offer these additional services so that we can help solve the problem and help heal that family and to make sure that these kids have a safe environment to grow up in where they feel nurtured and loved.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay.
You're welcome.
Mr. Booth, thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Lacey. Good to see you. And so I see in this chat, and this has come up a couple times about parenting programs and how we can support parents that are fed up or that are just struggling and they don't know where to turn. And Tor, I saw you had mentioned in here about some parenting programs that occur at the Survivors Empowerment Center. If you just unmute and share a little bit about what you do have, and if there's any other parenting programs that are out there. I know that at the high school level, this is something that we are talking about with our new strategic plan of how we can educate parents, how we can support parents. It's something that we're investigating deeply this year. We're looking at other districts that do this well. We're trying to figure out how we as a district can fill the gap here. It's something that I understand just from being at District 95 for a few years that just about everything in our community starts there, obviously, because it's a district that serves ages 3 to 14 years old. And we understand that when they get to the high school, a lot of times the path is set and we've got to try to deviate from that path or change it any way we can, but the earlier, the better. And parenting is the toughest job that any of us will have that we can never retire from. So just bringing any type of support we can there is helpful. And I know it's something at the high school level we are working on, but I'm gonna let you go ahead and share their tour, and then Tina, I see you threw something in there. I'll let you share after her.
Thanks, and Tina, my email's already in chat if you want to work on something. So here we don't have set programs. We really tailor our needs to our youth at the time. So particularly in the past year, self-harm has come up a ton. So we are working with parents about how to discuss self-harm. But like we were speaking about earlier, and like Detective Land brought up, some parents are not ready to hear that perhaps they need to try other parenting methods, or perhaps what they were raised with is no longer working or works in the world that we're currently living in. So a lot of times we also work with youth to talk to their parents. So we also do reverse parenting classes for the youth. So this is like how you talk to an adult about a situation. This is how we can empower you to bring up difficult conversations. And we just sort of tell our kiddos, it's not you versus your parents. You both are trying to be a successful grown up at the end of this. So how do we make you and your parent a team? How do we successfully get through childhood together? But then we also do other programming for parents that are more traditional. This is how right now we're working on, this is what grooming looks like. This is how adults can start to groom parents so that they don't see this sort of behavior. So we also do that, but we also are looking at other ways to navigate the problem.
Thank you, Tor. And Tina, I saw that you just shared that you'd be willing to help in any way, shape, or form through the Boys and Girls Club with families.
Yes, parent engagement, we all know. At the schools, you hold events for parents to come, and they sparsely come. The parents that come are the ones that aren't necessarily the ones you want to talk to during parent-teacher conferences. But anything we can do together to engage families I think is something that we just, if we attack it as a team with several different organizations working together, I think we can have a greater impact because then the parents see us working together. And then they also then learn about all the resources that are available for them and their kids. And we have funding from our grants just to do those things. So I'd be more than happy. We have a strong administrative programming team that could really just be available to do some great things.
Yeah, and I saw Ms. Henry talk about District's 95 services. I think she's speaking of our the Birth to 3 program, which there's a Birth to 3 program at District 95 and also at CCHS through our Rebound program, where we can give services to new parents and supporting them until their child is moving into the preschool age realm. That includes help with just taking care of a child. It comes with helping them to teach a kid how to read or even begin the process of like reading to your child in the Birth to 3 realm, providing diapers and providing wipes and teaching them how to clean and all those types of things. And I think where we're through our discussion today, it feels like the gap may be in those ages of those actual school-aged children from kindergarten through probably through high school and helping, and probably more specifically in the ages of 5 to 12 of how we're actually forming kids and helping parents to be able to deal with it. So if there's any action that leads from tonight, I think it is us brainstorming and figuring out how we can support families in that next stage of life after Birth to 3, and how we can come together to do that. And I know that on my end at the high schools, we're researching what other communities do that may lead to phone calls and assistance and with models of what that looks like, and knowing that we've got community partners to support in that. With that, it is 8 o'clock on the dot. And we want to 100% honor everyone's time. And we want to take a silent moment to give our panelists a round of applause for their assistance tonight. We appreciate you and your knowledge and your time and your effort in helping to support our community. We want to thank the sponsors, the Carbondale Racial Justice Coalition, Race Unity Group, Gift of Love Charity, Rainbow Cafe, Center for Empowerment and Justice, Boys and Girls Club, Black Chamber of Commerce, Women for Change, and the Carbondale United for assisting in putting this together tonight. Because if we didn't know that this was a hot topic, I'm sure we learned that it is tonight, because we could have probably continued for another hour and not exhausted the conversation or the resources that we have at the table tonight. Jess, do you have anything else as we allow people to sign on off?
Well, I think we need to thank our moderator too. You did a great job. We really appreciate it. And sometimes we have difficult conversations in our community where it seems like we're not all on the same side. And I think we are all on the same side around this issue. And so I'm really grateful to everyone that participated. And it seems like there's interest in moving forward and trying to continue collaborating. So just thanks, everybody. We recorded this. I will upload it to YouTube. We'll gather some resources and send it out to our community partners and see what comes next.
All right.
Have a good night, friends. Say to a safe Carbondale. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Night.